Welcome back to the Start to Finish course on upgrading to .NET Core. We are currently in the module focused on refactoring our application to use some of the new features from .NET Core that we just added. And this lesson, we're going to be adding in some log statements and kind of walking through how that process goes. Now, this is not going to be comprehensive add log statements everywhere, but instead what we're going to do is talk through where we put them and kind of demonstrate their use. So let's go over to Visual Studio. Now we have logging in all of our user interfaces now. We have it in the MVC, the WinForm UI, and the WPF UI. We're going to probably ignore the WPF demo from now on. We're not going to worry about that because it's not really part of this original application. That was just a demonstration to show you how to upgrade WPF when you don't have Caliburn Micro. So let's focus in on just the big stuff for right now. So the first place to start with logging, I think, is if we do a Control F, and it's going to pop up and we're going to say, we're going to look for, in the entire solution, we're going to look for, let's look for catch in the open paren. So try catch, we're going to look for the catch. I want to find all of these. And it's found 57 of them. We can pin this. Let's actually, there we go. Now we can pin it. I wanted to double stack. So we have a number of different locations with try catches. The first one is in the WPF demo, and we already have a log statement there. But if we come down here, we have one in the tournament controller in the MVC user interface with a catch. Notice we're catching the exception but not doing anything with it. This is a perfect place to add in some logging so we know that this exception happened. Because otherwise, just returning the view doesn't really give us any value here. So this is in the create tournament. If the model state is valid and the selected entered team count is greater than 0. So it's going to do this check here, but if something happens where it crashes in here somewhere, we're going to return the view. And we don't know why we're returning the view. So let's do this. Let's go to the very top here. And it doesn't look like we have constructor. So let's create a constructor. CTOR. And I'm going to ask for an iLogger. This is one of the reasons why we want to have dependency injection involved in all of our applications. Because we want it to be able to just say iLogger and get it. Control dot to add a using statement here. I'm going to call it log. And I'm going to do a control dot here and say create an initialize field underscore log. So what that does, it creates a private read-only iLogger for me, and then it assigns this incoming value to that value. So now I have this underscore log available everywhere in this class. Now I can come back down here to our, we even have another catch. So I did a catch and looked for the open paren, but there's some that don't even have, they're not even catching anything. It just says catch. So I'm going to catch the exception here. And then I'm going to underscore log dot log error. And the error is going to be, let's find out what this is doing. Editing tournament matchup. And one of our options here comes first. So exception comes first in our log statement. So EX, comma. So we're going to pass that exception in like so. And now we have our full exception information. And in fact, let's capture this whole log statement. So we have it, and then come down to the next try. which we have a catch, no exception being caught. So let's catch that exception. And before the return, we want to send this out. This is the details view. So there was an error getting the details. All right. And we come down here and look for the next try. We know there's at least one more in here. There is right here. And this is the create. This is for creating a tournament. There's an error creating a tournament. And there we go. So we've added some logging into our controller. So now whenever we go to the tournament controller and we have a problem, or either displaying or getting the details of or creating one, we can log that error to our log file. Now let's keep going. Nothing in the www root needs to be logged because that's for JavaScript. We're not going to do that. We do have logging in Tracker UI, but not here. So we want to, right now we're showing a message, but we're not actually logging it. So let's come to the very top here and we'll create a constructor. There's already a constructor. So for this one's going to be a bit more difficult because of the fact that we already have something being sent through the constructor. And so we know that's going to have a problem when it comes to creating this particular form, because we're going to put dependency injection in place where we're going to create our forms through dependency injection. So that's already going to cause a problem. And then trying to mix this with dependency injection, it is going to be messy. So you can't just ask for iLogger here. So we have to do a little bit of refactoring in order to get this to work correctly. Before we do that, one thing I forgot to do, back over here, the very top, I said iLogger, but I really want is an iLogger of type tournament controller, or tournaments controller. There we go. So, little tweak there. Okay, so I want to rework this so that this happens in a separate method. So I'm going to create a method here. I'm going to get public void initialize viewer, and pass in the tournament model. Like so. And so I'm going to take all this stuff here. I'm going to cut it out of here. I'm going to paste it into here. And I am going to go to these two references and change how they call this class. So it's called initialize viewer. So I'm going to double click here. Actually, what I'm going to do first, I'm going to close everything else out first. All but this. That way when I open things up, I'll know where I'm going to go back to and I'm not going to get confused as easily. So go to this first one. I'm going to open that up. And I'm not going to pass something into it, but instead I'm going to say frm.initialize viewer and pass in tm. That's the tournament model. I'm going to take this out of the constructor. So I'm doing the same thing as just in 2 steps now. Then I'm going to come back later with dependency injection and change how I get this value. And then over here, we have 2 references. The second reference is right here. And again, I'm going to say frm.initializeViewerTM and take it out of the constructor. And now I can take this out of the constructor. Like so. And I've prepped it for dependency injection. So I've split these two apart. Now, the only problem is that I am calling these forms and I'm initializing them like so. So when I add in the iLogger, that's going to be an issue because I'm not going to pass an iLogger in through here. So therefore, what I'm going to do is I am going to create another constructor that asks for an iLogger. Control dot, then do my log, control dot, initialize the field, and now I'm all set, except for the fact I want to call the base for now. So I'm going to say colon base, and that will call this constructor and initialize the component. I could, you know what I'm going to do instead? Since it's just that line, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to call initialize component in here as well. So it's a little bit of duplicate code. And the reason why is because I'm going to eliminate this eventually. I want to get rid of it. So now I'm going to put a to-do here. Get rid of this constructor once DI is in place. So as you can see, adding in logging is not just a matter of slapping in some log statements in different places and calling it good. There's more to this. There's more subtlety to it, and there's more complexity. We've got to think through how do we get the logger to the various places. So in this case, I also forgot, again, the tournament viewer form as a type. So we need to make sure that we handle the referencing callers correctly, that we don't have to refactor our entire application in order to make this work, but at the same time that we can move forward on adding these logging statements. So there's a lot to think through here to get it right. So I'm going to scroll down here until I find my try catch. It's interesting, variables declared to be inline. Okay. It's a good thing when you're scrolling through like this to make sure that you just kind of review what's going on. Now right here it says you can inline these because when this was written was before we could just say out double team one score and have it declared and assigned in the same line. So that's why it's like that. And there's probably some other code in here we could refactor as well. All right, so I'm not seeing any try catches yet, which actually is probably a bad thing. I do see a message box. We're going to come back to that, I think, and add a log statement in. Or maybe we'll do it now. We won't do everything. We're not going to blanket this thing with log statements. I just want to go through and kind of show you the various pieces to add. So right here, this wouldn't be an error, but I probably would say log.log information, or I might say log warning. So this isn't something that caused a problem, as in it didn't crash our application or cause an exception, but it's something we caught that wasn't correct. And you may say, well, we don't want to capture everything that's incorrect, do we? Well, we kind of do. And the reason why is because if you have a bunch of log statements where you find out that you more obvious, or maybe I should enable that feature as well. So that's what these kind of informational messages capture. So the warning here is invalid score was entered for team 2. The score entered was score. Now I need to add an argument for that score, and the score is this value right here, this value right here. So I'm going to pass that in as score, so comma that value, and now what happens is that will be entered in my log statement, so I know what they entered as a score. I might want to put quotes around this. A single quotes is probably good to put around it. That way, if they entered a space or 2 spaces, I would see that more visibly than if I didn't have quotes around it. Okay, so now we have our exception. So we're telling the user information. So let's, at the same time, log error, the exception itself, and then the application had an error in the scoring. I don't need to pass the message through because that's going to come through with all the rest of the exception information. So as you can see, the really obvious ones are in a try catch. If you have a catch, log that error. But the ones that are not as obvious are the ones where you're catching information before it causes an exception, like this right here, where we did a validation to see if we could parse the double, and if we can't, then we just told the user, hey, that's not a valid score. So I'm not going to go through everything here, so I'm going to stop right there with these. I'm going to move over to the library. I want to highlight this. Let's go into the tournament logic. Actually, that's not the greatest of places to go yet because it's static. I'm not going to go there. We're going to dependency injection and on logging. And this is what they mean by the dependency inversion principle. It's not that the user interfaces depend on this, it's that this depends on the user interfaces. So we're going to say, we're going to trust that you're going to give us certain information. Specifically, you're going to have a dependency injection system, and you can pass in an iLogger for me. Now we have to install a extension for the NuGet package for this. So that's Microsoft.extensions.logging. So we will go get that. And it's actually right here, so I'm just going to install it. And now we can say control dot. Whoops, that didn't work. It looks like I went too fast on this. Let's manage NuGet packages again. Select our extension. This is Preview 9, which just came out. I think I need Preview 8 instead. Let's install that, accept the terms. So if you have a different preview than the one the package is, that might be a problem. So I'm doing a Preview 8 right now, even though Preview 9 came out last night. So it looks like it's installed. So now it should be, I can do a control dot here and add that using statement. There we go. So control dot here to initialize my field. And now I can do logging inside of this text connector. And what we're going to do in here creating person, and I'm going to actually put the person in. I'm going to name it person and then pass in model. Notice that I don't have to name this what the variable name is. It's just going to go based upon order. So this is the first thing in the list, therefore it goes in the first replacement section. It's going to log that we're creating this person. You might not want to log this if it's a large object or if it has sensitive information in it. So if you're capturing social security numbers or credit card numbers or anything else that is sensitive, you might not want to log this. Even in fact, and this is one of those places where this is a small little application for an office. It's not for large corporations or for public consumption necessarily, but this is personally identifiable information. First name, last name even. So this might not be something you want to put into a log. You might want to put just the unique identifier of this user or something else or nothing at all. Be careful what you put into logs. Don't just log everything and say it's all good, because maybe you've encrypted your database and you've encrypted your connection string. You've done all this work to make sure you keep your information safe and restricted access to who has access to it. And then you log everything to an unsecured log location. So basically, you're taking all this protected information that's behind these huge walls and has roaming guards and all the rest. You're taking that all outside and putting it outside the wall and saying, we're all safe. Don't do that. So be careful what you log. I'm going to capture just this log statement here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to do the same thing for the prize. And I am going to capture the prize as well. And let's do this. Getting all of the people. And by doing these informational events, again, you can make these debug if you wanted to have them lower down a chain. But by doing these, we can kind of track what's going on in our application, where people are going in what steps. All right, a couple more. So this is a team. Notice by naming things the same way every time. It makes it a little easier for me. That can be a good thing and a bad thing. Getting all of the tournaments. I'm not going to bore you by continuing to do this over and over again, but I want to document at least this file. So there's a couple more we're going to do. And this is updating a matchup. And completing a tournament. There we go. So now I've logged anytime we go to text files. So I know, hey, did I get this far? And maybe when it comes time to track down an exception, this might give you a little bit more information about what's going on. Now, you probably don't want to log this level of information all the time, because that can make your logs quite large, especially if you have a heavily used application. This is why being able to modify what the log level is at runtime is pretty important, and per client. Because you don't want to log everybody doing tournaments at this level, but maybe just one person who's having this weird problem. And so you can track down their flow, and maybe you find out they're doing something off the beaten path, something that's not usual for the rest of the users to do. And maybe it's a training issue as well as a shut down that wrong path. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. We're using Text Connector, which I believe all of our applications are using, not the SQL database. We have two options in this application. We can use a SQL database, or we can use Text Connector. So since they're all using the text files, they should all be talking to this right here and filling in this logger information, and thus we should be able to see all those log events from any of the different user interfaces. Now, unfortunately, we can't just turn this on. And the reason why is because right now, how do people load this? They don't load it by saying, dependency injection, give me a text connector. Instead, they load it by saying, text connector, TST equals new text connector. So they're not calling this, therefore we're not going to be able to run our application. In fact, probably if we build this, we'll see that we have some errors. Build failed. So it's saying, hey, there's no argument given that relates to this. That's in the global config. So the global config is asking for this, and it's a static class. Awesome, but it can't just do this. We need to be able to get this from the dependency injection system instead. So I did this in this order because the next lesson is going to be dependency injection additions to our application. But I did it in this order to kind of illustrate a point. And that is, there's an order to these things. Over time. In this case, probably the best idea would be to start with dependency injection, not with logging. So even though you may want to have logging in place right now because you have a need for it, you're going to have to think about maybe putting in dependency injection first before you go to that logging route. Or you may have to create some type of workaround to make logging work even though it's not ideal. Okay? Now, I'm going to look back real quick. Yep, I forgot it. I always do this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to stop right there and not make this work. And that's frustrating, I know. But we're going to come back with dependency injection, and the first thing I'll work on is this global config and get this straightened around so that we can have this working the way we intend it to. And then we'll move on to other dependency injection things as well. So come on back for that lesson.